Hello, Arika.
There we go. Okay.
This is Michael from Validar here. I'm just going to be in the background. If you need anything, just ask.
Okay.
Like if someone can't unmute themselves or something, yeah, just let me know. But right now, there's no waiting room here. People should be able to unmute themselves, and then yeah, I think just chat.
Hanging out. Okay.
Yeah, cool,
So,
perfect.
lucky we've all been doing this for 2 months now.
Yeah, I know. Everyone's pros at the
Uh-huh.
web chat nowadays.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, very cool. And just so you know, the session is recorded. So
Okay.
yeah, just FYI. Cool.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, hi.
Hey, Arika.
Hi. I have to say, I'm amazed at how time organized everything. Like everything really starts and ends when it's supposed to start and end. I don't think I've ever been to a conference like that. I'm not sure if that's just an artifact of the online, or if your conferences are always this.
Well, one of the can you hear me?
Yeah.
Arika? Yeah. Okay. So it's one of the things about being virtual is everyone is all of a sudden is on time again. Meetings start on time, end on time.
And the talks don't seem to go over. You know, that's
Well,
always an
yes.
issue.
Yesterday was slightly different. We had some, but it's easy because you only have to press a button.
Yeah. Right.
And you're
right.
gone. Yeah. So thanks, Arika, for this wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. It was just as good as I had imagined.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah,
it's hard. You're not getting any audience response. It's a little strange.
Yeah, it's weird, but I am certain that it will resonate because it's so similar to what we do. And people to whom I told that you would be speaking at DevDays really thrilled.
Good.
Yeah, so that's really nice. So I expect some people to join us, but there's another session going on in another room, the startup competition. So they'll be here soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's still not the time yet, and everything starts exactly on time. So.
Yeah, it's 40, right? We should start 40. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just wait for people to show up.
Yeah. Are you in Amsterdam too? It looks dark there. Oh.
Yeah. Well, it's not dark yet, but that's the. But if you look here, it's still, you know.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I'm in Amsterdam, so.
Okay, well, it looks nice.
Yeah, that's the office. Actually, I'm all alone here.
Mhm.
Everyone's sitting at home,
Yeah.
is at home, but I decided to go to the office just the same.
Are you on lockdown there, or has the city opened up? Or
It's opening up
Mhm.
slightly.
Mhm.
So it's the cafes are open
Mhm.
and everyone's outside. It's June, you know, the weather
Mhm.
is nice. Restaurants are opening up again. Cinemas. So a lot of people who are returning back to normal here. It must be
Mhm.
similar in where you are in Chicago.
Yeah, it just sort of started up last week. You can have outdoor dining, and
Oh yeah,
you can go to the hair appointments now. Things
yeah,
like
same
that.
here.
Mhm.
Yeah, actually, I see a lot of things that make me wonder if it's really.
Yeah, it's a little. You get a little too comfortable, and you think, oh, things seem normal again, and then
Yeah,
it's a little dangerous to get into that mindset.
yeah. So the public parks here are really crowded, and everyone's
Mhm.
sitting, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
packed.
Mhm.
So it must be an easy job for a virus.
Yeah. Well, at least we can be outside. Seems a little bit better that way. And around here, people are wearing masks, like for everything.
Are
So,
they? They do?
in Chicago, in my neighborhood in Chicago, it's not the same all over the place. So
Okay.
yeah, for sure, it's
Okay.
become a little bit of a political thing. You know, do you wear the mask or not? Says something about where you stand.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it
Yeah.
shouldn't be that way, but that's
Yeah,
where
there
we
you
are.
go. We don't have that. We only wear masks in public transport, and some people do it in the supermarket, but not a lot actually. And it's entirely not a political thing to wear or not to wear a mask.
Okay.
You just do it or you don't.
Yeah. Well, it's better not to make it a symbol of something, you know.
Yeah. Well, the Americans are good at it, right? Making a symbol of
Yeah.
something.
We can split along any kind of line. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but yeah, things are feeling a little bit more normal, and we're having it's summer. It's becoming summer.
Yeah. So are you still in linguistics?
Yeah, I'm not in any academic department. I've been a pop linguist, so I've been writing articles and linguistics for a popular audience. And I have another book I just completed in quarantine, gave me the chance to really get it done, and should be out in the spring. And it's about why is English so weird. So.
What's weird about English?
Yeah, it's the title at this point is "What the Hell English: The Weirdness of English Explained." So.
Yeah. Is English more weird than any other language?
Well, it's weird in its own special way because of its history. It's not necessarily the weirdest or the most difficult. I mean, obviously, people all over the world learn it very well all the time. But you keep getting stuck on these questions of like, wait a second, why is this spelled that way, or why?
Well, the spelling
is
notorious, of course. The spelling is really weird. Makes it really, but speaking English is a different thing. Oh, look, we have a lot of people here.
Great.
Something must have been finished. That's nice. Hey, Ewout. So everyone turn on your camera. Hey, Graham.
Hello.
So
we made it on time.
Yay.
Oh, wow.
I encourage everyone to come this way. So there's another 15 minutes until the rest of the meeting starts, of course. So.
This is like backstage like you've never seen it.
Arika, that was amazing. That was so interesting.
Thank you.
From everyone over on our team.
We were all slacking heavily about how cool that was.
Oh, you must imagine, I was reading this book in front of my tent, being on summer holidays. I kept saying to my girlfriend, "Oh my goodness," but she, of course, I couldn't really tell her what I meant there, but so I was, I had to tell someone.
Yeah. Well, now you have some simple slides to use. So.
Yeah. What's also nice in the book, you also describe pretty vividly the authors themselves, right? The creators.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I could plot some of these people straight on the people we know in our community.
Yeah.
There's
So
types.
thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I'm a huge fan of the book, and I've recommended a lot of people to read the book, and particularly within the team, because what you talked about speaks so much to what happens in our community. And I realized that really after I read your book, I realized that really what we are doing is creating a language. And then I'm looking at all the pitfalls going, oh dear.
Yeah. Oh dear. You must imagine, Arika, that when we and with we I mean HL7 has designed a few of these languages before, and we always strive to for universal, unambiguous communication across the world with computers. And as I said, it somehow we failed. And when we did this language, which we call Fire, that's the name of the language actually, we explicitly had a back door to add your own dialect things into it. So to make it, to have some practical, if you couldn't formulate it in a language, there is a back door to have dialects and everything messy. So you can make it messy. But we got a lot of comments about that, because officially we should strive for universal interoperability across the world. But
yeah, well, it's interesting to me that you end up having to do that, because I say, like, language is not an information sharing tool. It seems like it is, but it's a lot more than that. But I would think that what you do actually is an information sharing tool, but I guess it's not exactly, it doesn't make it any easier, if that's what its explicit purpose is.
No, it doesn't. To give you an example, we can communicate that someone has to take a pill in the morning. But that means something entirely different in Sweden, where the morning starts at 6:30, than it would mean in the Netherlands, where it's 8. So we have the same problem still, whatever we try. And then, of course, there's a tendency to say, oh, but then we should dig deeper and actually, be more explicit about what that means. But you get in that morass that you've been talking about.
Yeah.
So it seems we're kind of stuck.
Okay, so Arika, I don't want to dominate the conversation because lots of people here, but I have a couple of questions for you about language that weren't in your book. The first is, I'm really fascinated for your views on the way Chinese written language works, with one written language for two different languages versus pinyin as a coming option. Can you comment about that at all?
Well, that has been a very enticing idea for language inventors. Like, look at what they do in China. They all speak different languages, but they have one writing. Like, that's a universal type of language. But it's so, and there's this conception that the characters are actually going straight to the concept. But in reality, the characters are still just words. They actually map to a pronunciation. And if you're Cantonese, it takes you longer to become literate because you don't have the same mapping as the Mandarin speaker, who the writing system is a little more geared toward. So it's not actually a one writing system that works for a bunch of different languages. It's one writing system that takes a lot of effort to get literate in, the further you are away from what it's intended for. And it does map onto, when you see the character, it pushes you to the word, to the actual spoken word when you read it, not to the essential concept. And it's a lot more complicated how that mapping works. It's a very old writing system, so it's had a lot of time to deviate from its original sound mapping abilities, but it is still just a way of representing spoken language. And it can represent different spoken languages, but in that case, you got to work a lot harder to create a more complicated mapping. So that's a vague way of describing it, but it's not the panacea that it seems. It's not the essential language of concepts that it seems.
No, I was studying Chinese with Duolingo. That's an American tool, right? And so when you learn the character for food, it will show you a picture of food, but being in a US-based app, it will show you burgers and Coca-Cola, but I'm pretty sure that the Chinese is a completely different mental picture when he sees the character.
Yeah, well, this is, the sign language has also been attractive that way. Like, ooh, a language of images, like, goes straight to the concept, right? And you see some signs in sign language and you think, oh, like, that's so much more direct to the concept, boy, that's just like a cap that a boy is using. But every country has a different sign language and uses a different imagery to get to the concept. So, and it doesn't matter, the image isn't what gives it the meaning. You just know that stands for boy, even if the boy has never worn a cap, or, like, this is turtle in American Sign Language. It looks like a turtle, right? Okay, you can see why. And this is turtle in Italian Sign Language. And okay, you can see why, that's a turtle, but they're different. And you just have to learn what the Italian sign word is and what the American sign word is. And if you try to use the other one, you're confusing and you're wrong. You're just still learning a word, even though it kind of looks like it's actually the concept.
I think it's interesting how the conceptual biases play in too, like in American Sign Language, mother and father, that, it's a patriarchal society, so the father's higher and the mother's lower. And it's like, well, those biases, even in a concept, are there in the signs. So
yeah, it's mapped onto space, and that space means something, but the words are still the word. You just have to know that that's the word. You can't just go from the imagery.
Yep.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Go on, Graham.
On the subject of sign language, there's a hysterically funny video about a fire chief talking about a fire with a translator to sign language standing beside her, translating, and the fire was in an adult toy factory. The sign language is just awesome. Yeah, I highly recommend it. I posted a link to it in the chat in Hoover. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
My favorite sign language story is from Trevor Noah, and I don't remember. I'll have to try and find the skit. But the official signer for the South African government, that he didn't.
Oh, the fake signer, yeah.
Yes, the fake signer, that he did it for years.
Yeah.
He got caught at Nelson Mandela's funeral that he was doing the signing for when President Obama was speaking. They're like, that's nothing. He's not even signing.
Yeah, yeah. He just made it up. Thought no one would notice.
Yep.
That's awful.
Could you say something about the evolution of languages? I mean, this is very special to invent the language, but in real world, the languages influence each other and they change every day, and with the young people and so on.
Yeah, language is not static. So even if you could invent a perfect language that's perfectly aligned with concepts, it wouldn't stay that way. It has to, if people use it, it's going to change and it's going to evolve, and meanings will change and pronunciations, the words will change. And that's, languages are used among people. And if groups of people get separated from each other, then their paths diverge. And that's why, Latin becomes all these different languages. Those groups stop interacting and go their own ways. And that can't be stopped from above. You can't put a lid on language change.
What do you think about language between computers? Because there was some experiment where they did two computers were talking to each other in English, and then during the experiment, the language changed to something that we could never understand.
Yeah, that's I don't know about that experiment in particular, but if you're creating messages, you're, like I said, you're not just packaging up information and sending it over and then unpacking it. It's in the transfer things are happening. So this packet doesn't stay unified, or it doesn't have an identity that you can package, send, and unpackage. It's things are happening in the transfer that will modify what's in there. And that's where the varying takes place, and what will make it look different when it gets sent to the next person or put in the next community. I mean, you can sort of do that with computer languages that aren't for communication, that are just for giving instructions. You can give unambiguous instructions in computer languages, but it takes a lot of work to get to the point where it's actually doing what you want it to do unambiguously. Way more effort than it takes to just talk.
But even then, you can also provide those instructions in different ways to get to the same end result. So it's not just a single unambiguous way of being able to say it. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, you know, creativity comes into the use of language as well. And that's, you know, when we say something, we all say it slightly differently in a different kind of way. And I'm not sure how you could capture something like that in a computer language, and yet somehow we still manage to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's still people doing it.
And it happens in our computer languages. What you see, if as soon as you create a standard, people will use it in their context, so most of the time in their own country, and adapt it to their own use. So you get dialects of languages. I'm pretty sure that, I mean, that happened with our previous standards. As soon as they got used, they got, you know, you get all kind of dialects, people using it slightly different. And I was surprised, I didn't know that was the case, that this happened with Esperanto too. So I think you conclude with that process of that happening is actually unavoidable, and that is what defines language. Is that true? Do I remember correctly?
Yes, yeah. So Esperanto has irregularities for the same reason that other languages do. So you had this accusative ending. When you have the object of a verb, you're supposed to put an N on the end. So mi vidis la hundon. You say, I saw the dog, you have that N on. But accusative endings are kind of hard for people in certain languages, and even people, and people joke about not remembering to put the accusative ending on. Even people who speak languages with accusative endings forget to do it when they're speaking Esperanto, and people laugh about it, but they never leave it off of saluton, which means hello. And that word comes from the expression, I wish you salutations. That's why it has an accusative ending, saluton. But that word is so common and repeated so often that no one ever forgets it because they've just heard it so much. It's just a habit. And that's what irregular verbs are. It's just a habit that we keep repeating. The most irregular verbs in every language are the most common, frequent ones, right? To be, to go. We say these so much in their original form for whatever, or not original, so at some form that is irregularly formed, because in the history that was actually irregular, but we stopped doing it that way, but we didn't stop doing it that way for go and be because we kept saying it so much that it just became a habit, like saluton. We don't leave the N off of saluton because it became such an entrenched habit. And that's what irregularities in language are. And even Esperanto acquired that after it had been around long enough. So, I mean, it's still quite regular. It's pretty easy to learn, but it's subject to all the things that regular languages are.
Hey, Arika, I'd like to ask a slightly different question. I was in a European country last year with a notoriously difficult language to learn. And one of the things that came up in conversation was that one of the native speakers claimed to me that their country wasn't racist because you could always recognize a native speaker instinctively. And if you're a native speaker, you were one of us, irrespective of skin color. And he claimed that racism was a problem for English speakers because there's no us by language. And then I was looking at your photo thinking the Conlang photo looks exactly like an HL7 photo in terms of the kind of people in the photo. I'm just interested in your perspective on that.
Well, whenever someone tells you, like, we don't have that in our culture because we don't have it in our language, they're wrong. I mean, look at, like, was it Hungary? What weird language are you talking about?
Well, I didn't want to out them, but I was in Finland.
Yeah. Oh, Finland. Okay, well, related to Hungarian. Yeah, it is a weird language. But, like, Hungarian doesn't have gendered pronouns, right? So it's just, there's no he and she. It's just it for everything. But does that mean there's no sexism in Hungary? You know,
we didn't claim they weren't racist, just that it wasn't skin color related. Yeah. It was language related.
Yeah, I would always be skeptical of really any claims about the relationship between a language and a culture. That, you know, that logland experiment was supposed to get to that issue, which was a big question in the 60s. Does the language you speak form your way of looking at the world? No, not directly, but it does, it gives you certain thought grooves that are easier to slide down, but it doesn't determine what's possible for you to think, and good or bad. So that's sort of where we've come down on that question at this point. But yeah, always be skeptical when people try to relate those two kinds of things.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on the screen.
What about, was the Conlanger photo consistent with the nature of the community? One of the things that we talk about is our community, which you can see quickly by looking through the people with photos on Zoom, heavily male skewed, heavily first world skewed, heavily majority skewed, but we're a totally open community. So we don't choose that. And Conlanger will be the same. They don't choose that. It just happens. Do you have any thought about that?
Well, you know, it's people following their interests, and it's a kind of a weird esoteric interest. But it's also something it's very hard to even hear about it. And there are reasons for that. You know, why would you even come across the idea, the group as Conlangers? You know, so people will find it because that's what they're interested in, but there are some things that make it hard to even find it in the first place, which, you know, creates a kind of typical sort of group who does that thing. And language invention as a whole, the story of language invention that I tell is pretty much a European story. And that has to do with the fact that these are the documents that we have. I have no doubt that this has been going on for as long as humans have even been aware that they're using a language. Like, as soon as people noticed or had the thought that this is language, they have been trying to do something to it. You know, this human do that. They see, you know, they have to build a house. They find better ways to do it based on what they need in the house or in the environment, or, you know, they keep tinkering and making better. And I have no doubt that people have always known with language. You know, where are the documents from 15th century Asia? You know, I don't know. And the reason that I'm telling this story this way is because these are the documents we have access to, or I have access to. and there's some Pan-African type Esperantos that were created in the 1960s and 70s. I think that that sort of based on Swahili. There are other attempts that don't happen just in Europe, but they're harder to get the documentation for. These are often self-published pamphlets, self-published books that the inventor makes it, tries to send it out into the world, and then it disappears because people don't pick it up, people don't start using the language. You know, luckily there are some libraries that just tend to keep all this stuff. That's what the language inventor tends to do. Send it to every university library in the world, hoping to get someone to pay attention. And most of them get discarded. But some libraries actually hold on to them. You gotta dig to find them.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
What do you think about, because you see that smaller languages, like for example, Frisian in the Netherlands is a very small language, and it's kind of slowly disappearing like other very small languages. Do you think that at some point we will converge into one language, or? I
don't think so. That people, you know, that's actually one of the things that Esperantists today are, their reason for being is to provide counteract the influence of English. So we need a common language, but it should be a second language for everyone. It shouldn't, where we all meet with some effort. It shouldn't be that, you know, I'm a native English speaker, I get to use my native language. That's not fair.
Yeah, but is it a realistic scenario that there will be a second language invented and then everyone will learn that? I mean,
but it's going to take a lot to get the ones who can use their native speech already to give that up for something they have to actually work for. You know, that takes some convincing. But there is a sense in which English is it's kind of, there's a thing called UN English, which has a different kind of vocabulary, and it's a different English that's specifically for second language speakers speaking about a particular types of topics in a particular domain, and it's going a different way because it's not as much run by the native speakers. And you can imagine something like that happening. It's like English itself becomes a kind of second language that departs from national languages. You know, at this point, it's very small difference, a very small step, but that's like a conceivable way things could go, where everyone speaking it as a second language, and even native speakers have to like change their English in order to participate in that. But yeah, I think I've gotten kind of a long way from your original question.
I guess I'll just see then.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting though, Abel's question, because it looks like we are past the language boom, right? That stuff that it got more and more diverse, because I don't think we are seeing newer languages, are we? Or the languages keep changing, obviously, or are we seeing new languages?
Well, there's studies of, you can like read papers on Englishes of the world. So the English of Hong Kong is different from the English of Australia, and you can actually show their grammatical differences and structural differences. And once you get a language in a particular community, it'll, you know, start to wander. But there is this, now we can communicate across borders a lot more easily, and that does help keep things from fracturing too much. Although you can, you know, go on a thread for brewery enthusiasts, and they have their own vocabulary and their own way, their own shorthand way of talking about their thing, and every little internet community has that.
I was going to say, if you stick around for the meetings in 20 minutes, you'll hear the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that, I mean, it's not exactly a different language, but you can see how that can turn into a different language given enough separation. And it's just natural. Like, you create a shorthand so that every time I talk about this thing, I don't have to explain to you what it is, because we're in the same group, we're in the same community. And so we get our own vocabulary, and we get our own little phrases and our way of referring back to things that become a sort of grammatical structure. And that is a sort of fracturing that's happened because you can be in any country and find your brewery enthusiasts or whatever it is online, and you can join that group from wherever you are, and you can get used to that way of speaking about things, and it can become yours apart from where you are, you know, in the world, and that's kind of an interesting new thing. That's, you know, that way of language is still, it's held together by technology. Technology sort of prevents the wandering in certain ways, but it also encourages a different kind of wandering, and we'll see what those turn into, and how hard it becomes to actually communicate between groups. I don't know.
Hi, Arika. I would like to say thank you for your book. And I have a question. So what do you think about specific domain languages like math notation or chemistry? Do they follow the same rules like the general purpose languages, or maybe there's something different? Well,
the reason those things work so well and in such a more systematic way is because their domain is so restricted. And not completely restricted. You can introduce new ways of expressing things in different notations, but the range of things you can express is very limited. So you can't say, you know, I left my purse in the car in mathematical notation, but you don't need to, because you're only talking about a limited domain. It's a big domain, but much more limited than what natural language needs to account for. So you can, if you have a limited domain, create a pretty systematic, not a perfect, not, you know, getting to the essential root of everything, not inflexible, but more manageable, more organized, more logical than you can for natural languages, because a natural language just needs to be in every domain, and that's what makes it hard to manage, hard to keep a lid on.
What I mean, the notion of dialects are inevitable, I think is something we need to accept. But our objective is, as much as possible, regardless of what the system is that captured the data or where it got captured, for it to be relatively understandable, and to sort of, as much as we can, minimize the amount of divergence that happens. Are there lessons that we can take from languages to sort of not necessarily prevent or try to lock down and keep change from happening at all, but sort of encourage the evolution to curve back on itself and have relative consistency, even as we inevitably have different corners and different areas that adapt what we do in slightly different ways?
I think so. You know, I do not have a sense of the hugeness of the types of information you need to deal with, but I can imagine you're dealing with human bodies and human days and time zones and things that happen between a doctor and a patient that are, you know, that can be sort of unlimited, but perhaps a domain of expected things that happen. And that does make it a little bit easier to get a handle on. It doesn't have to account for anything that you could say. It only has to account for a limited domain of things you need to communicate. However, the tantalizing aspect of that is like, well, all we have to do then is determine all the things that we need, right? If it's limited, we should be able to come up with the list. However, it's not really limited that way, right? It's like always going to change. Like, I mean, right now, like healthcare has to deal with this completely new virus that creates completely new conversations and completely new protocols. And like, you got to be able to then put that into the bag, and you have to do it at the same time that everyone all around the world is like doing it their own way, right? You can't come from above and say, wait, everybody stop, do it this way, because this is how we put it in our bag. So you need that flexibility. Like you can't get away from it, but it's still a flexibility around a somewhat definable domain of possibility, right? It's not like infinite, and it's not anything could happen, but
I would say the challenge is that health is just expanding really, really rapidly. So it's anything we could ever know about the human body, and that field is extremely exponential, especially now, and it has been for years. And so that's a struggle. It's not a nice tight domain. It's a rapidly expanding exponential.
And it overlaps with social, and it overlaps with culture, and it overlaps with tradition, and it overlaps with many other aspects of the human condition other than just what is the body actually doing right now. So it's pretty infinite in scope. But are there ways that where languages have diverged in the past and then come back together?
I don't know. I think, yes, like literacy, the advent of literacy changed things a lot. I mean, it's already a few hundred years old, but before literacy, languages could go much farther. Then you create a written language, and that written language is not totally stable and totally defined, but it's got a standard that people aspire to. Even if they don't always use it, you know, publications have editorial standards, and they're sort of shared within national boundaries, at least, or you know, magazines or book publishing will create, you know, schooling will create a set of protocols that even if your regular daily spoken language is doing all kinds of things, you want to become literate, and you become literate in a specific way. So you can speak your dialect or however you speak among your community, and you can also be totally competent in the literate form and use both, you know, and that literate form is a lot more generalized. And I think the advent of literacy managed to bring language together in a certain way. It didn't stop the dialect wandering from happening in daily life, but it created a level of language where everyone was coming onto the same page and doing things, you know, that are a little bit difficult to get onto that page. You have to actually get some education and do some schooling and learn the standards and, you know, spell things in a specific way. It's not, you know, you have to do some work to be able to get that re-cementing. And you can't force people to do that work either. You have to make it a thing they want to do or need to do. You can't say from above, like, now we're all gonna say it this way. Okay, I've decided everybody do it this way, and then everybody does. You can't do it that way. But you can create a standard, but it also naturally evolves. It's not decided top down. A standard evolves, but not because somebody declared what should be. But it does evolve. It can evolve.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would imagine that the advent of the printing press, or at least the wider use of it, also had a unifying impact.
Yes, yeah. So once you have the printing press, more people can be literate, right? You never had access to the written form of your language before, and now you can have a bunch of copies and get it out there, and people want to read it. And yeah, so yeah, the printing press goes along with the advent of literacy, of widespread literacy, and really
standardization of spelling.
Yeah, standardization of spelling, standardization of phrasing, and like the way of sounding like whatever like you want to sound like a political pamphlet, or you want to sound like a sermon, or you want to sound like whatever these published things are. There's a habit that you form by reading them, and then you absorb that habit and then use it when you do that thing yourself. And that's the naturalness of the process. It's not, you sit down, you learn all the things. No, you absorb it and then you imitate it, and that becomes the way it's done. And that's what a standard is. And really the only times in history where you have been able to do kind of a massive top-down language reform happen when most of the population is illiterate. So, they did this, there was a Turkish language reform that majorly changed the language, but it was done at a time when most of the population didn't have literacy. So they didn't have the habits established yet. Because once you get that habit established, then you're almost never going to change it. So we're not going to do English spelling reform because we're too used to the way we've already absorbed the way we do it, and that's how we do it ourselves. And to come in and say, no, we're going to change that whole thing is asking people to change the habit in a big way. And it's really hard to get people to do that.
Do you see in the languages that you have studied the need or the some push for learnability, or for making the languages easier to learn, and does that have an influence in the language acceptance or growth?
Yeah, certainly for, that's one of the goals of Esperanto. It's easy to learn, and so it's more fair. It's not such a struggle. But there's been, there's stuff like Simple English, like the Voice of America or BBC has a broadcast in Simple English, which uses a limited vocabulary. And there has been invented languages based on this principle. There was one called Basic English. It only had 800 words. These are the only words you could use. But that idea didn't work out very well because it required you to use all these English idioms. So you can't use the word, tolerate, because that's not in the list, but you could say put up with. But someone who doesn't know English needs to learn the idiom put up with. So it doesn't buy you much to just limit the words that you can use. But I think the Simple English broadcasts do a good job. It's not a strict list. It's not, you may only use these 1,000 words. It's a fine art to find that level, but I think you can simplify language to appeal to a wider audience and at least get the entry a little more easy. But it doesn't mean that you then influence everyone to speak that way. It's sort of a stepping stone. But it's definitely something that's possible to do for a stepping stone.
Arika, are you familiar with the, I remember when I used to go to Sunday school, there was a story of the Tower of Babel. Is it, I know sounds almost preposterous now, but was there a possibility of like a common root language when, ancient man was around that ancient people were around that most ancient people spoke, and then then there was a diversification of that, or was that just completely preposterous from the research that you've done?
Well, I mean, that's a sort of thing I don't even deal with in the book, but there's this whole other movement to sort of find that language, the original language of Adam. The problem is the lack of documents. We can do a lot. We can go back thousands of years based on linguistic analysis. We can look at a bunch of languages that are existing today, and we can look at documents from 1,000 years ago, but we can't go much beyond that. And we can use those documents to figure out how things diverge. How did Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European turn into Russian and Irish and English and all these languages that are very different from each other, but we can show how they go back to a hypothesized common ancestor. We can't do that for the whole world. We can only do that for certain language families that have enough documentation to be able to do that. So, and trying to go any further back than that turns into anybody's guess. They're kind of there was a meeting in Paris in the 1880s that basically said, that banned this question, like no more papers on what was the universal, what was the original language. Right. Like we can't, there's no productive way to have this discussion. But you know, doesn't stop people from wondering or coming up with hypotheses. And yeah, the lack of language disappears. We say it like people speaking 20,000 years ago, those words are gone. They're vibrations on the air. And if they didn't write it down, there's very little way to know what it was that came out of their mouths, or if they use gestures, or the problem becomes, the evidence becomes really scarce the further back you go. So yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get to that question.
Right, okay, thank you.
On the topic of languages kind of dying out and being lost, there are a handful of projects in our history where they've tried to like preserve information, like the biohazard or the radioactivity symbol, trying to preserve something that is a symbol for a meaning without knowing what medium is going to be used for that meaning. Do you have any opinions on those projects? They're kind of drilling down to the concept, like you mentioned.
Yeah, the 10,000 year idea. You got to make a message that will survive 10,000 years. If you want to say, don't dig here, there's nuclear waste. So how do you know what people will how they will transmit messages in 10,000 years? You know, you put it in every known language, you put it in pictures, you put it in, you can paint it a scary color based on what biological things humans avoid. You can try all these things, and there's been, you know, a lot of work on what the best way to do this is. And the best plan, I think, this was, I forget the name of the project, but the team that worked on this 10,000 year project kind of came to the decision that the best thing you could do, the biggest chance of success for the message to last this long, was to create a sort of mythology or a taboo through really almost a religious transmission that would be passed down culturally somehow through the years, and maybe lose its relationship to the message entirely, but keep the sense of dread and the sense of taboo. And that was something you could get a little more range out of, to sort of like create a high priesthood of the keeper of the nuclear waste that would be transmitted as a tradition. And even when it lost its contact with the original, the origin of the transmission, would somehow retain a little shadow of that sense of taboo. You know, that was kind of the best thing they could come up with, plus everything else too. And that was the solution. But there really isn't a better idea that can replace everything else.
Arika, maybe one quick question then. Thanks for staying with us for so long. I really appreciate it. This has been really fascinating to listen to. Such an interesting analogy. I was wondering if you'd be willing to kind of speak to the role of regulation or legislation as a method for preventing change or promoting use of a specific language, and then maybe describe like if that's what impact that kind of tends to have. I mean, I've been thinking like kind of cultural laws that attempt to kind of harden the use or preserve or promote the use of a traditional language.
Well, the languages that do this kind of thing have academies. So like the French Academy says, this is how we're going to spell onion from now on, or, you know, this is how some countries have been able to do this, but only for very small pieces of language at a time. So now we're removing this accent mark and doing it this way. Like, you can do that because you're dealing with the literacy level, right? You're dealing with this is what's going to be the standard language. This is what we're going to teach. This is what this is what editors are going to use. You can do that sort of thing, but you really can't legislate language otherwise. You can't do it from above. What you can do is manipulate the social signaling aspect of language. So people aspire to speak in ways based on the social value of speaking in that way. And you can institute in schooling this dread feeling of like sounding stupid if you don't do it this way. And then the students go on, take that feeling of embarrassment and then transmit it to the next generation. You'll look stupid if you don't do it this way. That's a way to pass down and enforce certain ways of saying things. But you'll always run into the place where this person doesn't care what they look like saying it and doesn't aspire to that level that you are trying to enforce. And we actually have a different level, a different social signaling where it's cool to say it this way. And this is why like young people do slang. They're doing it they have their own sort of social group with their own sort of signals, social signals that they're transmitting to each other, the way they use language. And, your teacher's not going to step in there and say, you should feel bad about doing this and be taken seriously. So yeah, the way you can't do it with laws or punishments, but you can get far with kind of social shaming, I guess. And are you in this club or not? Well, if you say it this way, it shows you're not a member. And if you say it that way, it shows you're a member of that group. And if you want to show that you're in this group, you better say it this way. But that's all enforced between the groups, not from the government or above. Yeah.
The economic incentive plays a role there too, like the Academy of France, or at least French as a country invests in sub-Saharan Africa, right, to try to promote the use of French in their model. Do you see like socioeconomic factors being like the biggest force for like converging on a language like French or English, as you mentioned?
Yeah, well, yeah, and why does English get around so much? That it opens certain kinds of opportunities, and it creates, people study English or learn English for very different reasons than they learn Klingon. Like some people do it for the joy. They love Shakespeare. They want to know But a lot of people do it because then they can do other things. If you got English, you get this opportunity, you get that opportunity. And you have to show the right signals to get those opportunities and speak the standard way, speak the certain way. So language is not, so when people inventing languages always seem to think like, if I invent the perfect product, people will want to buy it because it's the best product. But people don't buy into a language based on its features. Like, oh, this one is very logical. This one is very neat. I'm going to learn that one. No, they don't make decisions like consumers that way. It's more like, wow, if I drink Coke, then I'm cool, or I'm participating in that culture. So I'm going to buy into that language because I want to participate in what's going on there, regardless of any kind of features of the language, how neat it is or how good its spelling is or anything like that. People who take up with languages don't do it because of the features of the language so much as what the language can get you. I guess. I mean, I think I'm talking to a lot of second language English people are at this conference in English, which is taking place from Amsterdam. And I don't know, probably half the people aren't native English speakers, something like that. So we're all getting to participate in this conference because we bought that language. Well, I didn't have to buy it. I got to be born into it, and that's not fair. You know, that's what the Esperantists say. Like it would be better to have a common neutral ground, right, where we could all meet and be at the same disadvantage. But it doesn't work that way. I get to have.
Do you speak Esperanto as well?
Yes, mi parolas Esperanton.
Oh, sorry.
I did. For the book, I went to a couple Esperanto conferences because I didn't really believe it. I was like, yeah, they speak Esperanto. You know, I was imagining that kind of, you know, when you take a first level language and it's like, how are you? How many sisters and brothers do you have? Are you going to the swimming pool today? You know, that's what I imagined the conversations would be like. But it's not. It's a real. I'm thoroughly convinced it's a full real language that can do everything. That they joke, they fight with each other, they yell at their kids. Everything in Esperanto. It can do it all, and it sounds very fluid and natural. For some people, you know, lots of people in the community are, you know, struggling with it or just trying to learn it. But there are native speakers. There are, you know, a Polish guy meets a Danish woman at an Esperanto conference in Finland. They start a family. They don't know each other's native languages. Their family life is in Esperanto. And those kids are native speakers. Now, they're not monolingual native speakers. Like the kids speak the language of wherever it is that they live too. But their home language, their native language is Esperanto. That you can do that. You can make Esperanto a native language. And there's, you know, there's maybe like 200 native speakers in the world, something like that. But it can, but the language can handle that. I don't know. You know, it's hard to tell. Official data collected on this, and the Esperantists will always give you a higher number, you know. But
of course, yeah.
But it's definitely possible.
And how would that work for non-verbal communication? So, if everyone spoke Esperanto, would Southern European people still talk with their hands?
Yes, yeah, that's the thing. The thing I saw at these meetings or these conferences, I went to one in the US and I went to one in Cuba, and the people there come from all over the place and they speak differently. The accent isn't common, you know, like a person from from Bosnia has a Bosnian accent when they speak Esperanto, and they use different sorts of phrasing influenced by their own language. But it's okay. We still understand each other. It's still, you know, you don't look at someone and say, oh, they're a native Esperanto speaker. Well, the natives do speak a lot faster, I guess. But they'll have a different, like the native Esperanto speaker from the Polish family in Poland won't have the same accent or the exact same phrasing as the native Esperanto speaker from South America. And, you know, whatever gestures or habits of speaking they have culturally, they'll still have in Esperanto. But it still works. It's sort of, they're still communicating across national boundaries in their own way, while keeping their own ways.
So I'm going to have to run, Arika, to another, but I just wanted to say before I go, thank you so much for joining us. What you're doing is so relevant to us and so interesting, and from the number of people here still here, and we're obviously a lot of us enjoying that. So just, I really want to say how much I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm also gonna go. See you and thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Arika, I sent you a quick text over the app. So if you get a chance to take a look.
Okay, on the Hoover thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're checking it, otherwise I can send it in a different way.
Okay, great, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. This
Some questions, thank you.